Hi, friends. Father Kerry Walters here, pastor of Holy Spirit American National Catholic Church, and this is another Holy Spirit moment. This one a response to a rather popular atheistic takedown of religious faith. Over the years, several of you have asked if I would say a few words about a book written by atheist philosopher Peter Boghossian that has become rather notorious. It is entitled A Manual for Creating Atheists. And in this particular book, what Boghossian wants to do is to provide tips, which he calls street epistemology, that atheists can make use of in deprogramming Christians and speaking to Christians in such a way as to show them the foolishness of their beliefs. Foolishness that indeed Boghossian goes so far as to call doxastic pathologies. Doxastic coming from the Greek word doxa, meaning belief. So to have faith is to suffer from a mental and probably emotional as well pathology that prevents one from seeing the world as it really is. And so what Boghossian wants to do is to deprogram us from that pathology. Let me give him his due right up front. As a philosopher, what Boghossian wants to do is to encourage rigorous, clear thinking in his students. That was the same goal I had in my 35 years as a college professor of philosophy. And it's an admirable goal because we see the consequences of unclear and sloppy thinking in the world around us. But it seems to me that what Boghossian has done is failed to exemplify the clear and rigorous thinking that he wants to encourage in others. And he's failed to do it because in trying to take down faith, what he has done is to commit an informal fallacy known as strawmanning. He has taken the very worst, the very most poverty-stricken caricature of faith and assumed that it is a description of normative faith. And in taking it down, has destroyed that normative image of faith. And that's just not true. What he is doing is strawmanning because what he is not addressing are the analyses of faith made by Christian theologians, which are incredibly sophisticated and at the very same time incredibly plausible and run through the entire 2,000 years history of Christian thought. So whatever he's talking about in this particular book isn't the faith that Christianity recognizes. It is a caricature. It is a straw man. And as a consequence, his analysis, I'm sorry to say, is rather tediously shallow, which is not unexpected because we've seen that same kind of tedious shallowness in the writings of most of the proponents of what has come to be known as the New Atheism, of which Boghossian claims he is a follower. The New Atheism, of course, is that movement launched by people such as Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett and Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens, which claims to give us irrefutable refutations of religious faith, but in point of fact only embarrasses itself by demonstrating that it knows nothing about the tradition that it's trying to refute, and apparently doesn't care to learn anything about the tradition. So what does Boghossian, in spite of his good motives, say about faith in such a way as to distort it? Well, he offers us the old canard that faith is nothing more than either belief without any evidence whatsoever or a kind of sham. It's pretending to believe something which we cannot know. And we dress, according to Boghossian, we people of faith, dress both of these positions up in such a way as to disguise their shallowness. We dress them up in profound, deep language, which is intended either to deceive ourselves or to deceive others or to deceive both ourselves and others. We dress them up and make them what Daniel Dennett calls deepity, a proposition which sounds deep and profound, but which in point of fact says absolutely nothing, is just nonsense. Religious faith then is irrational, according to Boghossian. It rests on no evidence whatsoever and on no rational analysis whatsoever. In fact, it has to eschew both. Instead, it is a purely private, subjective feeling which has no correlation with the world whatsoever. It not only clouds our thinking by giving us distorted impressions of what reality is all about, but it also, says Boghossian, taints and even destroys the innate curiosity which we humans have, because what it does is to create what he calls a doxastic closure, a shutting down of any revisions in our belief systems. So we freeze in time and space, as it were, mentally. Well, there are three different things that can be said in response to Boghossian's putative takedown of religious faith. There are actually many things that can be said, but I'll limit myself to these three. The first is this. It's simply false to claim that faith is irrational or perhaps blind, as some people might say. It's simply false to say that analysis, rational analysis, and evidence has nothing to do with religious faith. Look at it like this. Traditionally, faith is seen to be comprised of two complementary components. One of those components is frequently called Preambles of Faith, and the other is called Articles or Mysteries of Faith. Now, the Preambles of Faith, Preambula Vitae, the Preambles of Faith are those propositions which we can arrive at through rational analysis and the investigation of empirical of the existence of a creating God. And moreover, we can infer from that evidence, using our rational abilities, that the attributes of that being, which we can call God, must be this and not that. So, for example, we can know that if there is a being which created everything that is, that being cannot simply be another thing in the world, and as a consequence, can't enjoy the attributes that things in the world possess, such as finitude, for example, or temporality. The Preambles of Faith then can give us reasonable, rational, and empirical reasons for believing that there is a being which we can call God. Faith is not blind in that regard. But it is the case that our rational faculties and our investigation of empirical reality can only take us so far. At that point, according to the tradition, what's known as the Articles of Faith or the Mysteries of Faith come in. They are propositions that we are attuned to by virtue of divine illumination or revelation. Reason can't stretch far enough to them, so God reveals them to us. And these propositions include, for example, the belief that God is Trinitarian in nature, something that we can't arrive at through reason, but a belief which is based upon the rational foundation given us by the Preambles of Faith and illuminated for us by God, God's self. So there is a wonderful combination in the overall faith understanding in the Christian tradition of rational investigation, empirical evidence collection, and revelation, all of which goes to show, once again, that faith is much more complicated than Boghossian, who wants to reduce it merely to irrational belief without any evidence would have it. That's the first response to Boghossian's fallacious understanding of faith. The second response is this. We can assent to a proposition with reasonable certainty without it being absolutely proven. Boghossian seems to think that the only way in which an individual would be warranted in believing in God is if that individual had absolute proof. But in point of fact, there are very few things in life and very few concepts and beliefs which we hold that can be absolutely proven. And in point of fact, I would argue the most important things in life simply can't be proven. But what we can do is assent to them because of convergence of probabilities that lend credence to them. A convergence of probabilities is what we base most of our important beliefs upon. We assent to those beliefs with reasonable conviction because they are backed up by a convergence of probabilities. The same thing can be said about God belief. Simply because we cannot prove it doesn't mean that it is without evidence or irrational. It is based upon a convergence of probabilities. Now, you can argue that the convergence empirical data investigation. But it is also an act of the will in that we open ourselves to the revelation that is given to us by God, which illuminates for us the articles or the mysteries of faith. And that act of the will is what we can call the trust dimension of faith. Trust is that practice which you and I indulge in when we open ourselves up to possibilities that we may not know for certain, but which we are willing to embrace because we believe that embracing them is conducive to our own good. The trust element in faith immediately shows it seems to me, to not at all be an example of what Boghossian calls doxastic closure, but in point of fact, an example of doxastic openness. When faith trusts God enough to allow the individual to be receptive to illumination and revelation that always necessarily rests upon the rational preambles of faith, so that it doesn't just go anywhere, so that it's not just a reflection of subjective whimsy. When we do that, we are being open to an increasing richness in our understanding and experience of God. And that too, that openness in trust, is part of what faith is all about. So in summary, then, faith in general and Christian faith in particular is not irrational. It is reasonable insofar as that it incorporates within the body of faith rational analysis and empirical investigation. Faith is open in that it is a trusting act that allows itself to be receptive to continuous revelation from God. And faith is a convergence of probabilities, not a whimsical, arbitrary, subjective, private instance of wishful thinking. So, my friends, Boghossian has failed in his effort to take down faith, as have all of the new atheists. I'm Father Kerry Walters, and this has been another Holy Spirit moment. Please consider subscribing to this channel if you enjoyed today's video. And as always, please, because we are one another's brothers and sisters, remember to wear your masks and to socially distance during this time of COVID pandemic. God bless you. I will see you again soon.